Hello everyone. This next feature is a presentation that I gave for a Sunday school class at Austin Oaks Church on December 7th, 2025. We talked about how we got started in this research and outreach ministry, some of the work we do at transformational events, and the epistemological basis behind the changes that we are seeing. We also talked about how we believe the body of Christ should respond. The discussion will be split into two segments in order to make listening to it easier. I hope you enjoy the show.
We're visiting today. They have a remarkable story. Perhaps the most remarkable is that the four of us were roommates in a different arrangement. So Letitia and Ginny were roommates at UT, and George and I were roommates at UT. And then a couple marriages happened, and we swapped. And so now the roommates are this way. We all got to know each other way back in the early 90s when we were students at UT. And then George and Ginny embarked on a Navy adventure for about 5 years or so. Went on to service as an engineer in New Mexico, then joined the mission field, have had remarkable time of service on the front line of missions, and then more recently have been involved in, I'd say, security support for missions work. And now they're sort of at the beginning of a new season of advancing the gospel in today's day and age, and so they're going to share a little bit about that today. So, George, thanks for coming. Gina, thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'll tell you a little bit more about our organization that we started since we stepped away from the mission that we were part of for the last 25 years. Orbis Sentry, and that's our ministry partner, Carl Tykrid. He's the author of this book, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about that as I go through what I have to share with you. But I want to start off with these two scriptures from the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 7. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, though it cost you all you have, get understanding. In Hosea 4:6, where God says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will reject you from serving as my priest. I think it's really important for us to remember that God wants us to have knowledge. Of course, it's not knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's not the knowledge that puffs up that Paul talks about. It's knowledge for understanding so that we can properly bear his image as we represent him here on the earth. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. You're going to hear a lot of our story, a lot of information that goes through it. Our story is very much integrated into what we're doing now, why we're doing it. But there's also a lot of information embedded within the story. And so I will share all that with you now. This is a picture of us in 2008 when we had been in the Philippines for about a year and a half. We were just getting ready to move into a tribal ministry on the island of Palawan, where the local people, they were called the Palawana. There was a gospel witness in two of the other dialects in the area, but in the area where we were, there was no gospel witness. We lived with them for about 3 years, and when we moved out there in the jungle, that's a picture of me at our house. The guys from the jungle would come in. They just want to come and sit and talk, and so that's what we're doing. And to get out to that location, we had this airstrip. We could fly out there with a missionary plane. It is a pretty quick flight, about an hour and a half maybe, from Puerto Princesa, the capital of that island. That's the plane. I'm not the pilot. We had another pilot that flew us out there. And then this was our dream house. And we lived out there in the middle of the jungle. I had solar panels on the roof, and our green signature is very strong. And
Carbon footprint.
Yeah, carbon footprint. Best carbon footprint ever. So we were working on learning their language, working on our goal is to learn their language and their culture in order to share the gospel of Christ with them. And that's a picture of me doing some language study with Rupin, one of my language helpers. We also did medical work. That's Ginny giving stitches to a guy who cut his finger with a machete. So that's what our life was like out there in the Philippines as we worked with them and lived with the people, and they would come by. We also, just so you understand, the area where we were located is this part right here on the island of Palawan. We were down at this area. And to the south, the southern part of these Southern Islands is almost entirely Muslim, and there's Borneo, Malaysia, Muslim country. We had on 2 occasions a terrorist group called the Abu Sayyaf come up to our village. They didn't actually end up making it into our village, but we were warned in advance that we needed to leave. And this was a terrorist group that in the year 2000 had kidnapped 2 of our missionaries from a resort up on Palawan and had taken them captive, held them in captivity for a year in the jungle and in a rescue tent. The husband was killed. So they were a very dangerous group. They were looking to make us political pawns in their ongoing war with the government. That's what we think they were trying to do. And we were prime targets because we were Americans living undefended out in the middle of the jungle. That was a very challenging time to have to deal with that, and it happened twice in the 2 years that we were there. And the trauma of that took its toll, I think, on our daughters, on my health. Certainly it was in constant state of stress. We ended up leaving the tribal ministry after 3 years, and we relocated back to Manila. They asked me to be a language coach, teach the people not only the national language, Tagalog, but also to help people learn one of the other languages of one of the local groups where they were living. There's actually around 170 different languages in the Philippines as cataloged by the linguistics groups. So the Philippines, you have to understand, they asked me to be security manager as well. And the Philippines is in quite a tough geopolitical neighborhood. From starting around the year 2012, I was helping with security. I was asked to be security manager in 2015. And then I just worked with the security team. China, I really started watching China in earnest in 2012 when China came and took over the Scarborough Shoals, which is right around here. They came in and took over the Scarborough Shoals. I don't have time to go into the full story. It's kind of an amazing story. But I watched the response of the Philippines and China and the United States failing to defend the Philippines, even though they're a treaty ally, and the newspapers saying all these terrible things about the United States in that circumstance. And the result of that, 3 years later, Rodrigo Duterte started his campaign for the presidency. Part of his platform was to become independent from the United States, and he was capitalizing on those political movements. I learned a lot about the geopolitics. I had to study the geopolitics, I had to study a lot of it. I had to understand the politics of the Philippines, had to understand the politics of China and Malaysia and all the different countries, what's going on there. As you see, Muslims to the south, Buddhists and atheists to the north and northwest, and up in Japan, mostly Buddhists. Taiwan probably has the next largest population of Christians in the region besides the Philippines. As in 2018, we came home when our youngest daughter graduated from high school in Manila, and so we came home, and I didn't know what we were going to do. A position opened up for me to join our mission's international security team, tracking geopolitical tensions. I was actually physically not well at the time, and so that put me in a position of I was not going to be operational. I was not going to be traveling a lot. I was just going to do the research. And so as doing the research, I was tracking geopolitical tensions, global trends, with a focus primarily on Asia. But as I was growing in my study of this area, the impact of China is becoming more and more broad, bigger, and having such an incredible outsized effect that I ended up becoming really a global analyst for the global geopolitical tensions. And that was something that the mission encouraged me to do. And so even though officially my focus was on Asia, I really did end up having very much a global focus. And so that's what we were doing. So then as I was studying and understanding what all the different trends are and how they're affecting things, I was looking for something that would connect all these things together, because I could see that when you're studying geopolitics, you understand nations have interests and they have imperatives. And these interests and imperatives drive the behaviors of the nations. You have to understand what the different interests and what the different imperatives are of the nations. But there's something that's connecting them all. There's something that's driving, it's a little bit deeper or broader than the individual interests of each individual nation. And so, as I went to a Christian conference, and I was listening to a speaker who was talking about the work that he had done, researching the global trend shifts. What we would think of, all of us who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, we would think of as secularism. But he's been studying this from a slightly different angle of seeing how all this has coalesced and come together and is become a movement, which he's called the Re-enchantment movement. And that's the reason why when he wrote the book, it's called Game of Gods, the Temple of Man in the Age of Re-enchantment. It's a research book that goes into a lot of detail on the different impacts of this movement at United Nations, how the International Criminal Court was formed, things like this, but as well as how it manifests in events like Burning Man and how it connects. So he said that he was going to the Eclipse Festival. Now, I don't know, how many of y'all heard about the Eclipse Festival that happened in Burnet, Texas last year? Y'all heard about it, okay. Jenny's parents live in Marble Falls. Carl was speaking at this conference, Carl Teicher, our ministry partner, and he was talking about, I didn't know him yet at that time. He was talking about he was going to this Eclipse Festival in Burnet, because what the Eclipse Festival is it's a group of people, it's like a subset of people that go to the Burning Man events, and they follow around wherever there's going to be an eclipse, and they set up a big festival with booths and seminars and sound stages, and they go there to venerate the sun. And they do that for a week before, and then the last day is when the eclipse happens. So he said he was going, and I was like, that's 20 minutes from my mother-in-law's house. Maybe I can go. So I ended up contacting him. We ended up going to the Eclipse Festival together. I'm going to show you some pictures. And at the Eclipse Festival, it was a culture shock, because what I didn't understand, what you all face when you go out into the work world, or what your children face in schools, this secular inundation that they get, is sanitized to some degree to make it more palatable for the overall general population. But out there, in one of these festivals, it comes out in full force, in all its glory. And there was a shocking side of it, there was an eye-opening side of it, and all of it, and taking it all in, was just a bit overwhelming. And I started to see two things. One is how this really does connect to the geopolitical and security tensions, to the things that drive national interests of nations, and why this movement of secularism that we see in our society, that we're all affected by, how it comes out there, but how it also is driving the activities of nations. And then also the need to reach out to people at these events, because they're apart from the gospel, or a lot of them have deliberately separated themselves from the gospel. We meet tons of people that say they grew up in church and now they're taking psychedelic drugs, and that's what they want to do with their lives. So what is it that would help us to understand both of those things and put them together? And I thought about, we've discussed this a number of times on our team. The real appeal that we have is this 2 Corinthians 5:20, where Paul says, "Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God." And we hear a lot right now, out in the world, you get on the internet, you hear a lot about culture war. And I think what God is asking us to embrace is not culture war, but cultural diplomacy. Okay? And as an ambassador, you think about what an ambassador does. When we lived in the Philippines, I had to go down to the U.S. Embassy multiple times as our mission security manager and interact with the diplomatic staff there, communicate with the regional security officer, talk with them, tell them about situations that we had to deal with, where we were facing other terrorist groups. These are things that I got to understand what an ambassador does. An ambassador comes from one kingdom or country and represents the interest of that kingdom or country inside and living among the people of another country. That's what the diplomatic staff does in the Philippines. That's what they do in China. And let's take China as an example to draw this analogy out for what we are supposed to do. The American diplomatic staff in China, they represent American interests there. But do they go out on the street and stand with a copy of the American Constitution on the street corner in China, especially when there's maybe a big Chinese Communist Party celebration? And do they say, Chinese Communist Party is evil, what they're doing is bad, what they're teaching? You need to read our Constitution, and hand them our Constitution. Hey, read this line in the Constitution. What does that mean? No, obviously we don't do that, and we get kicked out. The American diplomatic staff doesn't do that. Now, the American diplomatic staff represents the interests of America in China. The analogy breaks down a little bit because as ambassadors for Christ, we are trying to get the people that are in the kingdom of this world to understand that God wants them to join his kingdom. But we are to do this in a diplomatic way because we live and exist side by side with these people that are in the kingdom of this world all at the same time. Now I want to tell you a little bit about what the kingdom of this world, when it's fully manifested, like at some of these festivals, what we saw at the Eclipse Festival. This is our tent where we stayed, and you think of these things as just a big party where people are out there just taking drugs, and there is a lot of that. You can smell marijuana everywhere when we're there, but there's also world-changing conversations that are happening. This guy giving this lecture, he's a artificial intelligence software engineer for the last 25 years. I think he worked for Google, and so his name's Deke AI. And he has written columns for the New York Times. I think he's even written a book or two. And in this lecture, this is the very first one we went to, he's talking about we cannot afford to be over-constrained by incrementalism. Humanity needs cultural hyperbole at a pace never before witnessed. What is that talking about? This is revolutionary type talk. This is not some fringe guy just wanting to go get high. Okay, this is a high level stuff. Now, we did have seminars on going and getting high. That's what this is. These are this is at a psychedelic drugs seminar, and it's being put on by these two. Their names are Alex and Allison Gray. I believe, if I remember right, they run the Church of Cosmic Mirrors, which is on the Hudson River in New York. They are considered kind of gurus in the psychedelic space. They teach people how to use psychedelics, and what they're teaching, the doctrine that they're teaching on all that, is how good psychedelics are, how it's good for humanity, how it's the next stage of our human evolution, how it's going to bring us out into this great, wonderful world where we're all going to come to this incredible understanding of what our human potential is. Psychedelic drugs is a part of it. And the way she proves that is she talks about how she met luminous beings in interdimensional experiences while she was high on ayahuasca down in the Amazon, working under a shaman. And these luminous beings taught her this script that she has in a lot of her art. I've got pictures of it that I'm not showing here, but art, this like hieroglyphic type script that she puts in a lot of her art that she says is in ancient writings that was taught to her by these luminous beings. And it harkens back to the experiences like that we had with hearing our native friends talking about when they would go into the spirit, or when they would talk with these spirit beings. They had special abilities and powers to sometimes talk with spirit beings that would actually tell them things. This is the same kind of thing. We also saw a lot of mandalas in this world. The mandalas done in different fashions. They really exalt the Buddhist and the Hinduist kind of imagery. Now this one right here, the space stage, I'll talk a little bit about the space stage, because this is where my understanding really started to open up. Space Stage is run by a civilian advocacy group for the exploration and development of space. And I think that's something we probably are all generally in favor of. I mean, space, it's science, it's advancement, it's good. It's also the Space Stage. This is a venue where they're having speakers. They also had speakers from NASA and from SpaceX, and at various times, and they're talking about various issues with space exploration. One of the speakers stood up there, and he said this as if it was matter of fact, absolutely true. Intelligent civilizations in the universe last about 20,000 years, and if they don't become a spacefaring species, they go extinct. Now, how do you think he knew that? There's two things. I have two theories. One is they postulate based on all kinds of assumptions based on the Drake equation. Someday you want to ask Dave what the probabilities of that actually representing something real. He'll be glad to pontificate on that for you. The other way, I think, the more
Good call.
the other way, I think, where they got that idea is from Star Trek. That's the basic view of Star Trek. If you ever watch Star Trek and you've watched Ancient Aliens, there's one fundamental difference between Star Trek and Ancient Aliens, and that's that Star Trek admits that it's fiction. So they also said humanity is doomed. We're going to go extinct because we're about at that 20,000 year point. We're going to go extinct for one of three reasons. Either we're going to destroy ourselves, and you've heard the narrative of how we might destroy ourselves: climate change, nuclear war, using all our resources, whatever it might be. The second way that we might go extinct is an alien race from another planet is going to find us, and they're going to come and invade, and they're going to kill us all, or take us over and make us slaves, something like that. And the third way that he said that we're going to go extinct is someday, in the evolution of planets and stars, the sun's either going to supernova or become a red giant. It's going to swallow the earth. Okay? And so, in order for humanity to not go extinct, in order for humanity to be saved, the salvation of humanity, from their point of view, is that we have to become a spacefaring species, and in order for us to become a spacefaring species, we have to advance to the next great leap in human evolution. And that's going to involve the transhumanism, the psychedelic drugs, and all these other things, and us all putting aside our differences and coming together as one, eliminating the things that cause us to that cause division among us. So this is all part of the worldview of what they are thinking, and it comes out very clearly when you go to these events. At events like this, they're speaking about it at the space stage. So as we've studied, and as I've studied to try and understand where all this is going, where and what the impacts of these things are, because these are things that you may or may not realize it. Because the people that you work with, your children, they're getting this in school. They're getting this. It's a subtle idea, but it's downloaded into all of us, and it affects all of us. This idea that we have to come together and put aside our differences to save humanity. It's an alternate salvation message. Carl Tiger, my ministry partner, he's gone to the Parliament of World Religions. I'm hoping to go to the next one. They haven't announced when it's going to be yet. At the Parliament of World Religions, which is a UN-sponsored event that happens every 3 to 5 years. At the last one, it was all about getting all the religions together to put aside their differences. Now, they will recognize they're not going to try and make people change their religion or try and drop their religion to become one global religion. What they say is, let's put aside all our differences and cooperate. And that sounds really good, and we should cooperate, right? I mean, we want to cooperate with other nations and not go to war and things like that. But when that becomes the end all, is where it becomes a problem, because what they're doing is they're developing an alternate salvation message. At no point in the discourse and in the dialogue is the understanding that we are, as we understand from a biblical perspective, we are created in the image of a holy God, but that image is tainted because of sin, And because of that, we're in danger of being separated from God for all eternity. And our salvation is Christ has saved us from that end. But the salvation that they're trying to push through this system is the salvation of humanity from extinction. And to get our minds off of that. And they even have, at the last Parliament of World Religions, they had a workshop that they called the John 14:6 Project, in which they discussed strategies for how to train people to go into churches, to befriend young pastors, and talk to them about getting them to steer the church toward cooperative ideas, coming together to cooperate on eliminating climate change, and to steer them away from the exclusivity of John 14:6, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. So this is part of this whole system. Now, I talk about the epistemological base, because this is where it really comes down to what's going on in the minds. And I think this is where we can get to that point where we can understand how to engage with the people that we work with our children, with family members, with other people, to work on the epistemological side. It's similar to what Augustine wrote in his analysis in The City of God. And he says here, the earthly city was created by self-love, reaching the point of contempt for God. The heavenly city by the love of God carried as far as contempt of self. And therefore, as the plan of this work we have undertaken requires, and as occasion offers, we must speak also of the earthly city, which though it be mistress of the nations, is itself ruled by its lust of rule. He was talking about Rome when he wrote that. Augustine wrote The City of God at a point in time where Rome was going through great turmoil. The city of Rome had just been sacked for the first time in 1,000 years. And the empire, it was in the late stages of the Western Roman Empire. The empire was crumbling. He recognized, as he went through an understanding of biblical history, and he identified Babylon and Nineveh and other Greek city-states and Rome as these earthly cities, and how the gospel of Christ had come into the Roman Empire, which he identified as the church and believers, the body of believers, as being the heavenly city, the city of God, in which it exists in parallel. And in the city of God, he talks about how these two cities, you have to understand what he meant by cities was not a city like Austin or Dallas or San Antonio. He's talking about a city as a representation of a human idea, something that represents an entire civilization, an entire culture. That these two cities exist side by side and will continue to exist side by side in parallel with each other until the end times when Jesus returns and separates them permanently. Now here's where the epistemological diagram really matters. That as we put this together, as I was brainstorming one day on how do all these things fit together, and I came up with this chart. Now you have that's what I handed each of you. What you have here, if you look at the epistemology, and what I mean by epistemology is, epistemology in general, it means the study of knowledge. But for an individual, your individual epistemology is the basis on which how you decide what you believe is true. And I challenge you, go to the grocery store and ask the local checkout person, hey, what's your epistemology? You're probably not going to get an answer, because nobody really knows what their epistemology is unless they study it. We don't really know why but when you study it and you understand, there is something inside each of us that gives us a reason for believing what we believe is true. And there's two sides, the empirical side and the revelation side, the revelatory side. Empiricism or naturalism, the basic epistemology, and this started, it was built in through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment period. It really was codified at that point around the 1790s. And I'll tell a little bit more about that in a minute. But it comes from the idea that the only way we can know what is true is by things that we can observe and measure and reproduce scientific observations. For that reason, anything that's spiritual or comes from feelings, we can't really know if it's true. You can think about it, you can theorize about it, but you can't really know if it's true. And so this leads to a metaphysical belief system that Spinoza identified and called monism. Later in this century, Dr. Peter Jones lives out in California. He more accurately identified it as oneism. Okay? Oneism versus twoism. No, oneism, I think, oneism is the idea that God and nature are the same. You are God, I am God, the dog is God, the cat is God, the chair is God, the bell is God. We are all God. The earth is God, the sun is God, the moon is God. We are all one. Everything is God. And it all comes from nature. Everything is, God and nature are the same thing. And it leads to, that's the metaphysical idea, it leads to a naturalistic worldview. The worldview, that grid through which you interpret, empiricism is the epistemological base. The worldview is the grid through which you interpret things that you see. And the grid is naturalistic. I don't know if that's true unless I can measure it. This is kind of the harbinger cry for atheists. That, you can't know anything unless you can measure it. So everything, it's only material. But it's not only atheists that holds to this. There's a lot of people out in the world. It forms the basis of a lot of other religions. A lot of Hinduism, Buddhism, a lot of Eastern religions, even some branches of Islam. From the naturalistic worldview, you have a philosophical view. And a philosophy is derived in this system, over here on the left side of the chart. The philosophy is derived from observations. That's naturalism. It has to come from that because that's human behavior. We can observe human behavior, we can see things as they develop, and we can draw conclusions, and we can even make science about it. This is where sociological studies and technocratic studies interface and kind of become one. And philosophy, in this system, religion is an outgrowth of philosophy, not the other way around. Religion comes from it because religion becomes a necessary part of human existence as the naturalistic person observes these things. And so religion is derived from philosophy. And in the system, you have ethics that are informed by the philosophical and religious base that are based on nature and science, natural reasoning. Politics then are derived from the ethics that the people in the system hold, and policy comes out of the politics. Okay, that's the end of the first half of the presentation. Stay tuned for the second half, where we will discuss the biblical view and what our proper response should be as Christians.